or in fact without being visited by them when I didn't even call upon them. But that doesn't mean that my morality comes from that, or that I need the permission of the church by law established in Canterbury to think moral thoughts.
My point is that
or immoral ones, if it comes to that.
The point you're missing is not the King James Bible, but the sonnets have narrative voices behind them. Some of them are said by a young man. Some of them seem to be said in a homosexual tone. Others are clearly heterosexual. So in literature, because someone wrote a sonnet, that doesn't mean it's their opinion.
To be a Roman Catholic is not to believe that religion is a good idea, right? Or that God is a good thing, or that the Bible contains some true stories. It is to believe those things too. But it is to hold the belief that if you're not a Roman Catholic, you're not going to be saved.
I think it is not true, and I think it is also, not only is it not true, it is actually not the Catholic position.
Stand up, that man.
And to go even further, I don't even think, I think you've got to be careful here, because
I was trying to be.
I think we also need to be grateful to God, if you will, because of something that we have uniquely that makes us human. Something that in some strange sense almost appears to defy natural explanation. And by natural explanation, what I mean, of course, is not just the explanations of evolution or Darwin, but in a deeper sense, the explanation of being captive to physical laws. While all objects in the universe operate according to fixed laws, a stone, for example, has no choice but to roll down a hill. A cheetah has very little choice but to run after an antelope. We as human beings inhabit two rather distinct domains. On the one hand, this is the way we are. But then there's a second domain. This is the way we ought to be. In other words, we have this doubleness to our nature. And what's particular about the second domain, the domain of the ought, is that it appears to be free. In other words, you could never say to someone, you ought to do this, or you shouldn't do that, or you shouldn't discriminate on the basis of race, or you shouldn't be a gay basher, if they had no choice in the matter. If their decision was solely determined by physical laws, all of morality would be an illusion. But morality is as real of a fact in the world as any other. It's as real as this watch in front of me. If there are human beings who are without morality, we don't have philosophical disputations with them. We put them in straitjackets and carry them away. They're sociopaths. So the point I'm trying to make here is that not only is morality, if you will, a strange fact in the world, but it's a fact that militates against self-interest. And that is part of its peculiarity. Now, if you're an atheist, you might say, I'm grateful to Christianity, I'm grateful to the legacy of Christianity.
No.
What should I do about all this? And I think what you should do about all this is number one, to respect the fact that our world is the way it is, and your values are the way you are because of God, and specifically because of Christianity. And second, you might do well to consider living as if there is a God, because ultimately that will make you a better person. And if you give thanks to God, and if you talk to God, you never know. He might say something back. Thank you very much.
Shall I just do it?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Dinesh. Am I audible to all? Make it more convincing. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Dinesh. Dinesh is quite right to have said to you that there's no element of prearrangement in any of our debates. We've never concerted or compared notes before starting. And I hope we never will. We've never given the same speeches twice. We've sometimes repeated each other and each other's arguments. But there must have been an energy leak somewhere this evening, because he wanted to praise me and my fellow atheists for our compassion. There must be some mistake here, at least in my case. One of the very few times I've ever felt like being a Christian is when reading how the early church fathers lost for an account of why it is fun to be in paradise. The alleviation of the first 100 million years of saying thank you, for example, would say, well, at least you can go to the lip of the thing and look down and see the screams and wails and torments of the damned when you want to be cheered up. And I think, that's me. I'd be religious on that basis. One of my very few pleasures, actually, is crowing over the misfortunes of other people and trying to add to those misfortunes. And I'm hoping, in fact, to score a few points of that sort tonight. Thomas Aquinas, like me, didn't believe in astrology, or rather, he didn't think you should try it because it would only let the demons in. He thought it was a very dangerous science, the sort of thing that could allow the devils a foothold. Unlike me, believed himself capable of levitation. Had a higher opinion of himself, in fact, as a debater than I do of myself. But Dinesh has left me with no alternative but to start at a position I hadn't ever begun with before, which is to ask anyone here if they've read a novel called When It Was Dark by Guy Thorne. There's an off chance. I thought someone waved there. It was a huge bestseller before the First World War. Enormous international bestseller.
Dinesh claims morality is proof of God. That humans, unlike stones or cheetahs, live in a realm of ought that can't be explained by natural law. But history doesn't back him up. Moral codes existed thousands of years before Christianity. The Code of Hammurabi, 1750 BCE, established justice and protections for the weak. Egyptian texts like the Instruction of Ptahhotep stressed honesty and fairness. Confucius taught reciprocity centuries before the Gospels. The Stoics spoke of natural law grounded in reason, not revelation. Morality wasn't handed down from the sky. It was hammered out in human societies trying to survive. Biology confirms it. Hunter-gatherers enforced fairness because cooperation kept them alive. Franz de Waal's primate studies show chimpanzees and capuchins protesting unequal treatment. If monkeys grasp justice, morality isn't supernatural, it's natural selection at work. Meanwhile, early Christian thinkers praised cruelty. Tertullian and Aquinas both taught that part of heaven's joy would be watching the damned suffer. For centuries, the church defended slavery, silenced women, and resisted reform. Real progress came with the Enlightenment. Voltaire, Paine, Wollstonecraft, who challenged religious authority in the name of universal rights. So no, morality doesn't come from Christianity. It comes from us.
But the reason that you've got to say he might have been made up is you're establishing essentially an impossible canon of historical verification. Most of the historical figures in the ancient world are attested to by one or two, or in Christ has probably more attestations than many other figures whose historicity you wouldn't doubt for a moment.
Dinesh, I don't know why you're doing this to yourself. The existence of the Macedonian royal house is an archaeological question as well as among many others. It's decidable in innumerable ways. The probability of there having been someone with the one name of Socrates is very high, but it can't be absolutely attested to, and it doesn't need to be, because those ideas would have been in someone else's mouth if they weren't in his. The idea, it surely is important to you that the physical existence of Jesus can be proved in rather different way, since he is the Son of God, and the Word made flesh and born of a virgin, and by his death we are all healed. So you've got a little bit more riding on this than I do, and you've got no evidence for it. None.
We're not.
There is no evidence for any of these propositions.
I may have a lot riding on the resurrection, and we're not talking about those things. We're really saying, what you seem to be
I'm sorry,
saying...
but I am insisting on talking
What
about
you seem to be saying, even though we have we have the Gospels, we have the Acts of the Apostles, we have the testimonies of Suetonius, Tacitus, Roman sources, Greek sources, Jewish sources, including Josephus, then we have an early Christian movement following Christ that has no incentive to do so. They're in a persecuting Roman Empire. Many of them go to their debts because of Christ, and you're saying they all went to it because of a made-up guy. That's historically preposterous.
No, it's
and
not.
most historians agree with me.
The willingness of people to die for a rumor or a delusion or an illusion is very well attested. There's no element. There's never been, alas for our poorly evolved mammalian primate species, there's never been a period of history, however modern, where that won't happen. Look at how many people are still willing to do this for Joseph Smith, for example. Or for a deluded epileptic called Muhammad, a plagiarist of some of the foregoing. I repeat, if you will accept this for one, will you not accept it for all? Or are you not obliged to accept it for all? Are not all these prophets and revelations equally valid or equally false? My position is at least intelligible.
Let's come to your question about...
Consistent.
May I ask you about the question about religion poisoning everything? And I want to read a list of a few names. Dante. Did religion poison Dante? Did religion poison Shakespeare? Did religion poison Milton? Did religion poison Bach? Did religion poison Handel? Did religion poison Michelangelo? What about Bernini? What about the guys who did the Gothic cathedrals? Yes or no?
Yes to Dante. Made him waste a lot of his talent on descriptions of hell. Very gloating, very poorly written, sadistic accounts of what happened to people who he didn't agree with. That was a real waste of his
What
talent.
about Shakespeare? Was he in the same league? Ruined by religion?
No, with Shakespeare, well, I'm forced to the belief that if he wasn't himself a secret Catholic, he was probably from a closet Catholic family, and that there's some intriguing evidence in his work of the practice of the ancient Mass and so forth, and that's worth knowing, but it neither adds nor subtracts anything to his talent, and that when someone writes, when in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state, and trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries, and look upon myself and curse my fate, wishing me like to one more rich in hope, featured like him with friends possessed. You want to ask two things. One, who is this person of whom Shakespeare is jealous? Who is this man he wishes he was? Who is the man who has so many more talents, more friends than him? And second, he got it right about deaf heaven and troubling it with his bootless cries. He knew what despair was. He knows that the realization that you must begin with is that the heavens are empty and that we have to deal with each other here on earth, and this is the only life we have. Otherwise, we wouldn't need Shakespeare.
Christopher, this is
we
why...
have the holy books. Do you want to go on through all the architects and poets? I'm willing to do it.
No, but this is why you are such a charming evader. Because my point is that Shakespeare's moral universe is inconceivable without Christianity. The strength of it is he gives voice to different views within that universe. You isolate a view from one character, impute it to Shakespeare, and imply that Shakespeare somehow transcends...
No, excuse me, the person I was just quoting was Shakespeare. That's one of his sonnets.
Yes.
It's not a character from a play, as you should know.
The sonnets are
It's
all...
him reflecting upon his own condition. Now, my life, I'm willing to admit, my own life, which is mainly devoted to the question of language, is inconceivable without, say, the King James version of the Bible, sometimes not by the Aquinas group, but by others called the authorized version of the Bible. And by the Cranmer Prayer Book, which falls somewhere on the Protestant Catholic frontier, and other things. I couldn't imagine my life without being able to call upon verses and staves of this, or in fact without being visited by them when I didn't even call upon them. But that doesn't mean that my morality comes from that, or that I need the permission of the church by law established in Canterbury to think moral thoughts.
My point is that
or immoral ones, if it comes to that.
The point you're missing is not the King James Bible, but the sonnets have narrative voices behind them. Some of them are said by a young man. Some of them seem to be said in a homosexual tone. Others are clearly heterosexual. So in literature, because someone wrote a sonnet, that doesn't mean it's their opinion. But it's your turn to ask me a question.
Well, you know that, I suppose one of the things that most upsets and depresses and alarms, nauseates secular humanists is the sectarianism or any appeal to it. In other words, I didn't want Rick Warren at the inauguration, not just because of his apparent not just because he's a boring fat dunce and so on, but because and not because he's not inclusive enough about gay people, because he doesn't have to be inclusive about that if he doesn't, but because he was openly willing to say to a Jewish woman who asked him in public, could she too go to heaven or come to heaven? No, you can't. Now, I don't see how he can't say that. I'm throat clearing Dinesh in this way because I want to ask you something, and it's another question I want to lodge in the minds of others present here this evening. To be a Roman Catholic is not to believe that religion is a good idea, all right, or that God is a good thing, or that the Bible contains some true stories. It is to believe those things too, but it is to hold the belief that if you're not a Roman Catholic, you're not going to be saved. Now, so I'm asking you, and we now have a fresh occupant of the Holy See, Mr. Ratzinger, as he'll always be to me, who is increasingly determined to restore the doctrine of ex ecclesia nulla salus, that there is not just the church, but there's one church, one true church. Well, I'm going to ask you anyway, and you must have asked yourself, and I'm going to ask everyone else present for their consideration. Do you think that's true or not?
I think it is not true, and I think it is also, not only is it not true, it is actually not the Catholic position,
Stand up, that man.
And to go even further, look, I don't even think, I think you've got to be careful here because
I was trying to be.
Even from an evangelical point of view, you mentioned Rick Warren, and even if someone takes the Bible for what it says, literally, I'm not a biblical literalist, but even if you were, the Bible says really very clearly that Jesus is the way, in fact the only way, to salvation. But there's a second proposition that is often confused with that, and that is everyone in the world, whether they lived before Jesus or whether they lived in other cultures, but if they have not positively accepted Jesus Christ, they are going to hell. There are two groups of people who infer this. One is a certain type of extreme and ignorant fundamentalist, and the second is a certain type of equally ignorant atheist. Both read the Bible the same way, and draw from it conclusions that are actually neither stated in Scripture, nor in fact the position of either the Catholic or the Protestant churches.
Dinesh ends by insisting that morality proves God, that our sense of justice and equality comes directly from Christianity. Christopher Hitchens answers by pointing to the record. The Bible contains explicit instructions that uphold slavery. Exodus 21 sets down laws for buying, beating, and inheriting slaves. Leviticus 25 authorizes the ownership of foreigners as property for life. The New Testament repeats the same instruction. Slaves, obey your masters. These words were not symbolic. They became the backbone of centuries of Christian defense of slavery. In 1452, Pope Nicholas V issued Dum Diversas, giving Portugal the right to enslave non-Christians. The Anglican Church owned plantations in the Caribbean. In the American South, ministers filled their sermons with these very verses to defend the Confederacy. Entire congregations sang hymns on Sunday and returned on Monday to work their human property, all with biblical sanction. Women's place in Christian teaching followed the same line. 1 Timothy 2:12 commands women to be silent and not to teach men. Augustine described women as the weaker sex. Aquinas wrote that women were defective men. Canon law bound wives to their husbands as legal dependents well into the modern era. The Vatican resisted women's suffrage into the 20th century. Marital rape was not recognized as a crime in most Christian countries until secular courts struck down the doctrine that wives owed permanent sexual access to their husbands. Generations of women were told their duty was obedience, their silence a virtue, their suffering a divine command. The history of moral progress unfolds in other places. During the Enlightenment, new ideas of freedom, equality, and rights emerged through the work of writers and revolutionaries. Voltaire denounced the cruelty of religious persecution with biting satire. Thomas Paine wrote The Rights of Man in 1791, declaring that every person possessed inherent political rights. Mary Wollstonecraft published A Vindication of the Rights of Woman in 1792, demanding education and independence. Denise Diderot wrote that men will never be free until the last king is strangled with the entrails of the last priest. These voices did not whisper, they shouted, and their words shaped the revolutions that followed in France, America, and beyond. When laws against slavery appeared, they were written by governments moved by abolitionists, influenced by reason and humanism. When women gained the right to vote, it was after centuries of resistance by religious institutions. Consent laws came through the tireless work of secular reformers. Abolitionists, suffragists, and labor activists carried torches that lit entire nations, and those flames were often fought hardest by pulpits and altars. Hitchens closes with his trademark clarity. Morality is not a divine gift wrapped and delivered from above. It is a creation of human hands, earned through argument, sacrifice, and courage. Every gain in liberty and dignity was the result of people daring to think for themselves and refusing to be told that ancient texts must rule forever. That struggle is ongoing, and it belongs to all of us.
Well, I do think that religion provides a survival advantage, but it in no way follows that religion is untrue. I think that reason provides a survival advantage. We develop large brains, for example, to elude woolly mammoths and so on, or at least the challenges of nature. And yet that doesn't mean reason is untrustworthy as a means of doing logic or trying to understand planetary rotations and so on. So religion could be both a source of solidarity, which it clearly is. Look, the vast majority of people from the beginning of history in all cultures have been religious. So from a Darwinian point of view, you have to concede that religion has a powerful survival advantage. Now earlier, a young lady asked a question that was treated as silly when she was talking about lying and stealing, but I think the deeper import of that question is this. Religion is ultimately a reason for hope in the idea of cosmic justice. And what I mean by that is that life is very unfair. We believe in justice and we say what goes around comes around and stuff like that, but we know it's not true, right? Many times the bad guy ends up on top, and many times the good guy comes to grief. So all the religions of the world are in some senses asserting that that may be the terrestrial word on things, but it's not the final word. I mean, look at Hinduism. If you are a lousy guy in this life, hey, we're going to be seeing you as a cockroach in the next life. Cosmic justice. So the survival advantage of religion is multiple. I mean, number one, it is the sole tested means of transmitting morality to the young. Right? In every culture, if you ask someone, where did you learn about right and wrong? He says, I'm a Muslim, I'm a Hindu. Now, true, we can probably do it by philosophy, but I've yet to meet a guy who says, I got my morality from Hegel. So we can talk all we want about philosophy, but the truth of it is religion has delivered the goods as being the transmission belt of conveying morality. What about hope in life and a sense of purpose? When there was the Virginia Tech massacre, how come that secular campus suddenly became a kind of cathedral in which everyone was invoking consolation and God? In other words, my point is religion, by giving a sense of purpose and meaning to life, by ultimately answering the large questions that science has proved radically incapable of even entertaining. I mean, science doesn't even ask why there is a universe, and only purports to describe how we got a universe. So science is answering, in this case, a very different question than the one posed by religion. So if you imagine two tribes, a secular tribe that basically says we're descended from the amoebas, we've come from nowhere, we're going nowhere, morality is stuff we make up as we go along, and another group of people who believe we're the special creation of God, history has a purpose, your life has a purpose, that even if no one else loves you, there's a God who loves you, and that there is an eternal life to reward the just. Which of those two camps is more likely to survive and prosper?
Dinesh is doing very well for the first half of that, and I completely agree with him. My friend and ally, Daniel Dennett, in his book on belief in belief, says that he thinks it's extremely likely that religious faith gave people advantages of survival. If you go to the witch doctor and you think he is a real doctor, everyone knows that there's an element of morale involved in recovery, and it may be a very small advantage based on an illusion, but these are areas where even a tiny advantage may indeed help. However, rather than confine himself to that, Dinesh goes on to say, but wouldn't it be nice if it was true what the witch doctor said? You just heard him say it. I mean, after all, you'd feel a huge amount better if there was life everlasting as a reward for virtue. Well, that's known as wish thinking. I phrase it like this. I'll take up your Jefferson challenge again, if you like. Thomas Jefferson says in Notes on the State of Virginia about the slavery question, he says, I tremble for my country when I reflect, you've all read it, that God is just. If you haven't read it, you'll remember I said it. You'll go and read it now. I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just. Who can forget? But if there is a just God, what is there to tremble about? If there's a God who really loves you and knows that you're there and cares for you and looks out for you and is interested in how you're getting on and how you're going to get on and wants the best for you, what is a small question like slavery? All your feelings of responsibility and care about that are dissolved. You're bathed in the refulgence of an absolutely wonderful thing. The only price of it would be, unfortunately, because nothing comes without a price, you'd have to submit to a celestial dictatorship. But hey, what's that in return for a ton of love?
Well, I'll answer your question very briefly. Why was Jefferson trembling? Well, Jefferson was a slave owner. He owned about 200 slaves. And he never freed any of them before his death. He understood, he didn't have to be told, the tremendous innate power of human selfishness. You don't need theology to explain the slave owner. Slavery is rooted in human selfishness. Jefferson knew that and how powerful that was. He trembled that that instinct, so rooted and so powerful, would prevail over what Lincoln would later call the better angels of our nature. So he trembled because man, although he knows better, is inclined to pick ultimately, in the short term, the more profitable, the more convenient choice, but ultimately the terrible choice.
Gentlemen, we only have about 10 minutes before Father Kevin comes back up and declares the winner. So why don't we try to get as many students as we can.
Okay,
Sir,
very quick. Jefferson did free the ones who he'd fathered, and he did free their mother. He freed the ones who looked like him.
In the mezzanine?
I'm going to ask this question, run, because I'm from CSU. This is for Hitchens. You said it is not unusual for people to die for a myth in reference to the Muslims and the Christians. However, don't historians generally agree that all the 12 disciples were martyred and killed, 11 of them? And wouldn't it be much more strange for first-generation Christians to be tortured when they know it's a lie?
Doesn't challenge what I said at all. I take it as a comment. No, there's no historian who would say that, by the way. No. It's not, these things are not historically established.
And no one ever died for anything they knew to be a lie, even if you think of the Islamic radicals, they are dying for an
I didn't say they
imagined
knew it. I
promise.
didn't say they knew it to be a lie. I said the whole story is a legend.
But if the whole story is a legend, then the early Christians, having no basis for
May
it,
have
would
been under another impression. I can't know the subjective views of somebody else. I don't. It's the same as someone saying they saw the stigmata. If I wasn't there, I can't say to them they didn't. I can only say I think it's much more likely they were under misapprehension.
Exactly. Well, we're talking about plausibility of motive here. And,
Yes.
you know, for example, Paul, in discussing the issue of Christ's death, says that he has 500 witnesses. He says some of them are dead, but some of them are alive. And this is, by the way, in a book written about 30 years after the crucifixion. So my point is, we're talking about historical documents in historical time, and we're trying to attach motives and plausibility to them. I also want to point out, you mentioned a moment ago wishful thinking. Somebody asked me about the survival advantage, and so I answered in those terms. But I do want to point out that wishful thinking is always punished in evolutionary terms. From an evolutionary point of view, it makes absolutely no sense to entertain a set of beliefs about the afterlife that are in fact illusionary. To see this, imagine two rabbits, one of which is, you might say, the religious rabbit, and the other is the atheist rabbit. And they are both being pursued by a lion. The atheist rabbit goes, "I have only one life to live, I better run like hell." The religious rabbit goes, "I got another life waiting for me that's even better." Which rabbit is more likely to survive? Point I'm trying to make is, from an evolutionary point of view, religion is very expensive. People who much poorer than we are built pyramids and cathedrals. They invested a lot of money in this. My point is, why would these things survive if they were illusions? Why wouldn't evolution encourage atheist points of view to survive? Because they are based on a more hard-headed assessment of the world in front of us.
That's a good question. Answering it in reverse, and assuming the question is to me, and trying not to take up too much time, the huge majority of people in the educated, developed world have become at least secular. You can certainly plot it along a graph of development, that church attendance, religious fundamentalism, all these kinds of things have declined as we've evolved in that sense, if you want to put it that crudely. The second, though, is that I don't think that there are certain lessons that are not transmissible.
Christopher Hitchens opens with his usual sharpness. He points out that belief's persistence has never been proof of truth. People once thought plagues came from demons, or that thunder was Zeus hurling bolts. Those myths lasted for centuries, but survival doesn't make them real. Comfort, he says, has never been evidence. He turns to history. Entire empires were built on slavery and conquest while invoking divine blessing. The Spanish Inquisition tortured thousands in the name of faith. Papal decrees authorized Europeans to enslave Africans. In the American South, preachers quoted the Bible to defend bondage. Crusades marched with crosses while burning villages. If there is a universal judge, Hitchens says, that judge has remained silent through centuries of injustice. Bart Ehrman adds depth from the texts themselves. Exodus and Leviticus regulate slavery, not abolish it. Paul commands slaves to obey their masters. The same writings order women to remain silent, submissive, and dependent. Church fathers built entire systems on these verses. Augustine declared women naturally weaker. Aquinas called them misbegotten men, and Jerome described the female body as unclean. These weren't just sermons. They shaped laws, property rights, and the rules of marriage for centuries. Hitchens returns to meaning. Religion offers stories, he says, but stories are not answers. Afterlife, divine purpose, cosmic judgment, none have evidence behind them. What matters are the choices we make here and now, building justice, resisting oppression, defending freedom, and creating meaning without asking permission from authority. The debate continues, but the message is clear. Human progress has been carved out by those willing to challenge sacred claims and hold power to account. That struggle, Hitchens insists, is not finished. It's our responsibility to carry it forward with courage. What's your perspective on this? Do you think morality depends on religion, or can ethics and compassion stand on their own? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this sparked new ideas, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to keep the discussion alive.